This is our third solo show for Remedios over this course of almost 2 decades. She's only had 3 solo shows since her premature death in 1963. She died at the age of 54. Many people believe it was a heart attack in her sleep. That's how she passed away, but it was sudden. And as a result, she only made maybe 300 works of art. We believe there are only 120 paintings. And the balance of those 300 works are drawings, gouaches, and other works on paper, and a couple of objects. And from that, and the reason I state and start this off today with that is that her work is so rare. So to be the only gallery presenting 3 solo shows in this period of time, and to be able to do her first ever drawings exhibition, I mean, she never even exhibited her drawings when she was alive. So if you haven't been upstairs on the 4th floor of the Adler Beatty space, you'll see a collection of amazing drawings that come from a wonderful friend and colleague who's here in the audience. I'll let him remain anonymous if he wishes. But they come from a very treasured family collection that we have been able to get to know over the last 15 years. And we're really proud to bring them here in New York City. And with the love that I have of Varo and that Frances and her son Alex have of Remedios Varo, bring them here and do the first show of Remedios' work in New York in over 4 decades. Bravo. So it's a rare, rare treat. So we're going to talk a little bit about her drawings today. I have a lot of questions for these 2 folks, and we've had some back and forth already. But I'll say a couple things to start. We're really thinking about, a little bit about her biography today. We're going to talk a little bit about her processes. We have a lot of thanks and gratitude goes to the Art Institute of Chicago. For those of you who were lucky enough to get to their show last year, it was a record-breaking show. According to the curators, broke the attendance records at the Art Institute, all-time attendance records at the Art Institute. We have one of their incredible publications here. But they did an analysis where the curators and conservators went back and forth between Mexico City and Chicago and in their laboratories. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But it was their uncovering of these, let's say, 23 or 24 processes that they identified that she used in both her drawings practice and her painterly processes that really gave birth also to the show, because it was this really delicate appreciation of her drawings and the detail that they go into in their book. And all of those techniques on paper are on view upstairs on the 4th floor. So I also want to thank my staff, Leslie in the back, who's based here in New York, thankfully, and Melanie, who next to me knows more about Varo's market than anybody else, I believe, in the world. So I would like to say a big thank you to Samantha Friedman. She is the curator of prints and drawings at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City here, and Guillaume Kientz, who is the director and CEO of the gorgeous Hispanic Society that I had the first time pleasure to meet, to visit just a couple days ago. So thank you both for being here. I just want to start maybe with you, Samantha, if you don't mind, talking a little bit about Varo's, biography. Like, how did we get here, and how did she get from Spain to Mexico, and how does that inform what you're seeing upstairs?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Wendi, and thanks to everyone for being here. And it's a pleasure to be in conversation about Remedios. So she was born in 1908 in Angles, Spain, in Catalonia. And she really, over the years, I think, and I think in presenting the kind of like details of her biography, it's important in this case, maybe even more so than in the case of some artists, because of the ways in which some of those realities kind of make their way into the work. So I just wanted to sort of foreground that, and we can talk about how some of these facts and figures and places and sites kind of make their way into the work. But she was born in Spain. Her family moved to Madrid when she was young. She studied She studied fine arts in Madrid. I should say her parents already kind of are imparting some of the dualities that would make their way into the work. Her father was a hydraulic engineer. He also believed in Esperanto. Her mother was a strict Catholic. So already at the beginning, you have this mix of kind of rationality and religion and spirituality kind of flowing through what she's thinking about. They moved to Madrid. She studies fine art, and she would marry her first husband, who she met in art school. They would move to Paris for a year. It was her first exposure to Paris. They kind of struggled. They moved on to Barcelona. And in Barcelona, she kind of fell in with this avant-garde group that included artists like Esteban Frances, Oscar Dominguez, Marcel Jean is there. We have a beautiful exquisite corpse drawing in MoMA's collection that they make during that period. She kind of gets in with this para-surrealist group, the logicofobistas, the fear of logic in Barcelona. And then she ends up making her first of two exiles from Spain to France with the rise of fascism. And so she meets and becomes partners with the French surrealist poet Benjamin Paret. They go from Spain to France, where she really is at the heart of the surrealist community in Paris. Paret is older. There's this sort of intimidating brood of Breton and Miro and Ernst and all of these folks in the mix in Paris. And they're there until she will make then the second of her two exiles. With the rise of World War II, they make their way to Marseille, as many did, Breton with Fredo Lam, until they can have safe passage to Mexico in 1941. And so that kind of, that constant journeying, that uprooting, that kind of dual exile, I think will be so important in her work. So she makes her way to Mexico City in 41. She becomes part of this community of expatriate artists there. Her very close friend, Leonora Carrington, Gunther Gershow, the photographer Kati Horna, this whole community there in Mexico City. And this is really where she begins her practice, her mature practice. She and Leonora are very close. They're, in addition to exploring their artistic processes, are thinking about spiritualities, the thinkings and writings of Uspensky and Gurdjieff. They're making potions, they're making recipes. So this kind of very active exchange that's happening among this community. And in the early 50s, she meets Walter Gruen, who will become her third partner. And it's really with that partnership that she finally has the security to work on painting in a devoted way between in the early 50s, 1955, she has her first exhibition in Mexico City, a group show, 56, her first solo show. And so in that period from sort of the mid-50s until, as Wendi said, her untimely death in 63 is really the year when she's making these paintings that we know. But of course, the whole time she's also making drawings.
So what do you think, from what you just described, how do you get from that part of her life to her becoming wider known today? And she's becoming increasingly more well known.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to say that she was immediately respected. Her works were immediately purchased in Mexico. So I think her original shows were sold out in Mexico City. So she was like already immediately a celebrity in her own adopted home. But it took longer, as some things sometimes do here and elsewhere, right? So I think when we look back on maybe the last 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, you can think about landmark exhibitions like in Wonderland at LACMA, which focused on this community of artists, all the way up until the Global Surrealism show Beyond Borders that was at the Met and Tate just a couple of years ago. Remedios' presence in the last Venice Biennale, the Milk of Dreams. So, and of course, key museum acquisitions along the way, highlighting the work, including including some at MoMA. So, yeah.
That's very exciting. I mean, one of the things, Guillaume, we've talked about this, and I've learned so much from you over this last year. So I'm interested in how you think Varo is in the context. How do you think of her in the context of masters, and how do the drawings fit into her as a masterful artist? Because that to me is something that I think is increasingly becoming more widely accepted and critical in curatorial circles.
Right. Yeah, that's very true. I think art historians, we tend to try to put artists in boxes. So is Remedios Varo a Spanish artist, a Mexican artist? Does she belong to the surrealist movement? I mean, in many levels, I think she goes far beyond and all that, and that's everything seems to be reductive when it comes to what she is and how to characterize her, and surely what we call old masters play an important role in her journey as an artist, but not necessarily like many other artists. It's not like one artist had a very strong influence on her. What I find fascinating about her is how her journey is like an aggregation of all what she ever experienced, and that starts in Angles, in Catalonia, which is a beautiful Romanesque and Gothic place, and you can see that, you can sense that, you can feel it through her work. Then, of course, Madrid, and she can go to the Prado, she sees El Bosco, she sees El Greco, she sees Goya. There is a lot of Goya. I mean, upstairs there is Personaje Alado with this cat bird head that is totally reminiscent of The Sleep of the Reason by Goya, the famous print. And but also I think at the Prado she must have looked at Renaissance painting, early Italian painting, but also Dutch painting and early Netherlandish painting, especially for the symbolic and the cryptid reading that she seems to enjoy putting in her many works. So I think she was just like a spoon, like taking and drinking, but always keeping, and of course later Paris and later Mexico and the critical encounter with Leonora Carrington. So she really belongs to many different boxes, and she's of course her own box. And if I want to make one connection with an artist with which I think she has a lot in common, it would be someone like El Greco. Because El Greco is the same kind of pattern, same kind of journey. Born in Crete, was not didn't find what he was looking for there. Moved to Venice, trained as a Venetian painter. Market complicated, didn't work out. Went to Rome. Well, Rome, it's all about fresco. He's not good at fresco. So finally, he made it to Spain and he found Toledo. And somehow Mexico City was Remedios Varo's Toledo. And I think, and again, El Greco, when you look at his paintings, you can tell that he was trained as an icon painter, and you can tell that he had a very strong influence of Venetian painting, Michelangelo, but he is at the same time consubstantial to the Spanish school. And so again, I think there is a lot of parallel that can be made between Remedios and El Greco in terms of their journey.
Yeah. I love that. I haven't heard that before, and I think that's like a big discovery. Like today, I don't think I've read about that comparison. So that's now for our next person getting a PhD, right?
Well, and there is one other thing. I believe that I never read about the many influences that she might have been exposed to and sensible to is the viceregal painting. I mean, if you're familiar with viceregal painting, so painting in Mexico during the Spanish ruling, iconographically it's extremely sophisticated. It's very mystical. It's very spiritual. It's sometimes it looks a bit weird because we're not used to that kind of imagination creating these 3-head figures and so I really think that she somehow was responding to that. She was clearly, to me, she was clearly stimulated by the overly imaginative Mexican school for the 17th and 18th century.
It's amazing. So I have to ask, what do you think in terms of how does she fit in the context of modernism? And having studied her for the last few years, and looking at her drawings and paintings, what do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think the relationship, even with orthodox surrealism and modernism, we were just talking about a little bit, is complicated, right? Yeah. So much of modernism, or a certain interpretation or a certain lens of modernism, is about abstraction. And so I think that kind of figurative impulse, narrative impulse that is inherent to a lot of surrealism is already kind of like a rub in the side of modernism that modernism has to negotiate with all the time, even like the most orthodox surrealists. But, and I think maybe with Varo, it's twofold, right? Because so much of modernism is about like saying no to the past and breaking away from something. Whereas she is, as you just so beautifully pointed out, is so hungrily incorporating all of these references to art history, and is kind of digesting everything she's seeing with her father in the Prado. And so there's this sense of the past, both in terms of her technique and in terms of her iconography. And there's a sense of not only figuration, but of narrative. And then there's this sense of spirituality, of magic, all of these things that are sort of complexify really productively some of the stricter, more old-fashioned narratives around modernism that we might have understood. So I think that in a way, this kind of recuperation of figures like Varo into the story of modernism is so important, not only for her individual story, but for the ways in which it kind of stretches and expands our understanding of what modernism is.
I want to get to this. This is the question I've been wanting to ask all day. I've been waiting to ask this question, and Melanie and I have been talking about this too, but I want to talk a little bit about the drawings, and we'll come back to this, I think, modernism in a little bit. There are all these techniques. Can you just explain what some of her techniques are that are on view, and the difference from one to another? What's the difference between a transfer and a cartoon, just for starters? Right. And what are those different processes?
So I'm so glad you raised this, because what I love about the collection of drawings that's on view upstairs is that you get a real array of some of the techniques and some of the different types of drawing that she used, that so many artists use, right? So there are some drawings that we mentioned, the winged creature that reminded you of Goya, is a study, right? It's a drawing, it's a straightforward drawing in the sense of its existence as a drawing. And you have a figure, and she's working through this beautiful kind of hybrid figure who has this cave-like doorway in the chest, which is so beautiful. Although I will say, and we can talk about this more too, she complicates the straightforwardness of that study with the inscription on the back of the drawing, which suggests that she had hurt her right hand at the time of making that drawing and had drawn instead with her left hand. So if that's indeed true, more power, because that is a beautiful drawing. So you have, a study, right? A drawing that may or may not kind of result in its being used within the context of a larger composition or a painting. And then there are a couple of heads, right, that have that same quality as a drawing, where it's a kind of her working out a face often, which has a reminiscent sense of her own face for a figure in one of the other works. But then you have these drawings that are being used more directly in terms of their transfer or their journey toward a canvas. And in one of them, which is a study for To Be Reborn, you have a figure, a kind of female bust, which again is very reminiscent of the artist, and you see a grid. right? So that drawing is being squared up, which is, of course, an ages-old technique for transfer toward the canvas. So she's using the grid to overlay the composition so that she could more easily put that figure on a canvas. But then you have transfer drawings. And what I love about these drawings is that you have maybe the most tactile sense of their relationship to her process and how she's actually using them, right? And I just want to be really clear. I want us to all, like, it's hard without the drawings here, but if we can kind of imagine in our heads the process, because it's not simple to kind of wrap your head around, right? So she's making a drawing on transparent paper. And sometimes these are quite architectural. You can think about the kind of engineering style of drawing that her father would have taught her. And you also see, if you look at the sheets, these scribbles on the back of the drawing. So you're looking at this really fine line, this kind of linear scaffold. And then you're seeing something that's totally counter to that, like a scratch or a scribble on the back. And so what she was doing was making a drawing, almost creating her own carbon paper by drawing on the back, and then putting the drawing on the canvas. You can see pinholes on the drawings too, another side of that. And then redrawing the lines that she had originally drawn. And when she redraws the lines that she had originally drawn, the graphite that she has applied to the back of the sheet is being transferred onto the canvas. So that's like her own version of carbon paper. And so that sense of a transfer drawing really gives you this like direct relationship between the drawing as a working drawing and a drawing that she would use to kind of make its way onto something that probably an artist would do digitally now, right?
Right.
And I think it's important to mention, I mean, you said it, that she's an incredibly rare artist, but those drawings, this material, it's not necessarily conceived to survive. It has a function, and when it's been used, there is no real reason to keep it. And we've lost so many of these artists by so many amazing artists that it's kind of a miracle that we have. And also because she works in this. Also, she absolutely not traditional, but she works in this traditional technique. So for all artists, audience of all kind of field, it's so interesting to look at them to understand what you just so brilliantly described.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, that kind of those kind of processes are unique to go back to the question of modernism versus old masters, right? That's the kind of drawing that your artists do more than mine, right? But they threw them away. So we have lost them. You know, for El Greco, we know 8 drawings, for instance, as we mentioned El Greco. For Velázquez, none. So, 3. Caravaggio, none. Yeah.
So, wow.
And I want, when you go upstairs, if you've seen the show already, or if you go upstairs and look at it afterwards, there's one transfer drawing, which is a study for El Flautista.
It's the cover. It's actually the cover image from the book too,
right.
And it's reproducible.
Right. So that's a close up there. But if you look at this octagonal tower in the painting at left, you'll see upstairs a transfer drawing for exactly that structure. And what's so amazing is that one of the techniques that she uses, which, as Wendi mentioned, our colleagues in Chicago have so beautifully kind of laid out in this taxonomy of techniques, one of them is scratching into the canvas. So she would build up her support with layers of white gesso, and then she would paint, and then she would sometimes incise, and they did all these tests to determine whether it was an ice pick or even a crystal that she was using to incise into the painting. But so this really linear part of the tower on the left side of the tower is the scratched in portion. And that's what corresponds to the transfer drawing upstairs. So this really linear architectural study. And you'll see when you look at it, it's cut in this very particular way. And the shape of the cut of the drawing is exactly where the left side of the tower, where she's scratched in, gives way to the right side of the tower that she's painted. So the kind of logic and structure materially of the drawing corresponds exactly to the multiple techniques she'll use later in the painting. And as recently as this catalog, there's a suggestion that maybe that part of the transfer drawing is lost because Chicago had the other parts of the transfer drawings for other portions of the canvas, but not that one. So they were separated. So it's amazing to kind of recover and see the portion that corresponds to that tower.
And again, we see so much the influence of the technical drawing that, she learned with her father when she was quite young. So that's something that she kept all the way on.
Yeah.
How do you think her drawings and paintings relate to one another and maybe relate to other artists? I mean, I have your O'Keeffe, drawing show in my mind, but do you see any similarities? You also mentioned a lot of the great Spanish masters too, Guillaume. I'm wondering what do you think for her relative to some of these other artists? How do they relate?
Well, Spanish artists, old masters, they're not really into drawing. Again, Velázquez 3-4 drawings, El Greco 8 that we know of. Goya is, of course, the stellar exception, and I see a lot in common between Remedios Varo and Goya, but not that much on the technique front, more in the visionary approach. So I think when it comes to technique, she is probably more looking at early Italian paintings or Renaissance paintings, this very linear graphic approach. So yes.
Maybe like Botticelli?
Maybe. Yeah, maybe.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Show close to our hearts.
Absolutely. Yeah, for very good reasons.
Yes.
So there was a Botticelli exhibition in San Francisco recently, and my husband was the curator.
Yes.
This is why disclaimer, I have a bias. And that was so interesting because Botticelli is such a linear artist that you don't expect his drawings to say something very different or to be even interesting. And the demonstration was they are incredibly interesting and incredibly insightful to understand his practice, his processes. And I guess the same can be said about Remedios Varo. I don't know if you agree.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think, you brought up O'Keeffe, that's, in a way, it's like an opposite situation in the sense that, like I tried to make the case in that show that those are works on paper that are very much their own final works in their own right. But I think it is interesting. There is a drawing you have upstairs, which is, I don't know if it's like technically in the show or it's a bonus drawing, but and I'm going to butcher the title, so I'm going to let you do the title.
Aparto los que voy de paso.
Thank you.
It's in the beautiful back room of the show.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. But I hope it's okay to mention it because I think its identity as a kind of a work on paper that is a discrete, standalone work on paper in its own right, as opposed to a study for a painting, is important. And actually, the relationship that work has to something like, just O'Keeffe's works on paper, or any number of artists who made works on paper, is that what Varo's doing in a drawing like that, where there's a figure who's in the middle of a rainstorm and she's kind of immersed in the clouds, and you get this kind of like atmospheric swirl around her, you get this beautiful, and back to the question of modernism and what can make something modernist, this beautiful marriage between the subject and the means, right? So you have a subject which is a storm, a rainstorm, and the techniques that Varo is using to create that atmospheric sense. She's splattering the work. Maybe there's some decalcomania in there. So there's all these kind of mysterious processes that are mimicking and drawing out the very mysterious processes of the weather, right? How does an artist kind of create atmosphere with her own liquid materials, just as whoever is doing that with, liquid material in the air? And so that to me is something much closer. But of course, there are also plenty of modernists who are working with much more traditional drawing study techniques. And I think to kind of conflate the Spanish and the Dutch and a little bit the French, we have a squared up drawing in our collection, in MoMA's collection, that Miro made as a study for one of his Dutch paintings. And so, you get that same squaring up that you see in a Varo drawing like To Be Reborn.
But I think she's a bit everything. She's very very experimental, but
Right.
very traditional in some. I mean, she uses a lot of cross etching in the paintings, for instance, which is absolutely a graphic
Right.
technique. And listening to you, I was wondering whether Goya's technique as a painter could have influenced her. I mean, we have early sources saying that Goya would use, like a piece of wood to paint. I mean, we are coming back from believing that was the truth. Perhaps it was just a legend to warm up his fame. But still, the idea that an artist can use whatever they want to create something, and they need to be super imaginative about what we create the right effect, and this is something that surely she could relate to.
And I think that's where so much of kind of the magic of Remedios lies, is that it's this this duality and this tension, but also this harmony, to use one of the titles of one of her works, between precision and complete lack of control, right? That precision, that engineering drawing, those very careful lines, that perspective, but then also to court disaster, to court accident, to court automatism, right? Through these techniques like rubbing or decalcomania or frottage or whatever it is. So I think that's where so much of the, if I can use the B word, so much of the beauty of her work and the interest in her work lies, is in that kind of tension between how can something be so precise and also so mysterious at the same time.
And also, accidental. That's something super important in surrealism. And that reminds me this story that Pliny relates about, the ancient painter Apelles is struggling in painting, representing the smoke going out a horse's nose, and at some point he gets upset and he takes a piece of cloth and he just throws it at the painting, and here it is, it's perfect. So, un coup de dé, jamais n'a voulu aller au hasard, here we are.
Exactly.
Can you talk a little about the architecture, the very particular kind of architecture that she uses? I'd love to have both of your thoughts about that.
I'll repeat that just for the camera, for the recording. Frances is asking to talk about the architecture in her work, because it is so essential and part of her drawing process.
Yeah, I mean, I'll mention, I think you mentioned the kind of particularities of her hometown, right? And actually in a work that is in MoMA's collection, a drawing from 1947 called The Tower, there's this kind of stone architecture, a tower like the title implies, and this kind of round fortress-like basin of water. And from my understanding, I haven't unfortunately been to Anglais, Spain, but that kind of medieval architecture of Spain is what's being kind of evoked in that architecture. But also, if I understand, the kind of obsession with the octagonal. So the tower in El Flautista has 8 sides, and some of the architectural spaces for which some of the other drawings relate to paintings relate to some of the mystical and spiritual beliefs that she was interested in, this idea. And even in the painting Harmony, the sense of an octave, and that's that relationship to an octagonal tower. So there are these kind of layers of meanings, both historical and spiritual, I think, in some of the edifices in the works.
And she plays a lot between what's open and what's closed. Everything looks like a fortress, but there are windows, doors everywhere, and you see a lot of what's inside. So that's a very interesting game she play visually.
Right, and two of the drawings upstairs actually relate to works in which a figure or a person is kind of busting out of the wall, or like magically appearing from out of a hole in the wall. So to be reborn, you have this figure who's coming forth, and in the related painting, she's kind of emerging from a crack in the wall. And then the study for emerging light, which is this little funny guy who's kind of coming up through a hole in the ground and looking up. So these kind of cracks in the architecture too, and how those cracks let some of the stranger things that we could imagine exist.
But again, and as original as she is, and ever surprising, what she is so evidently the result of all the things that she's been being. You know, like if you think, as you said, that her father was a hydraulic engineer and her mother a devout Catholic. Well, if you look at the church-like building that she draws or paints, it's exactly that. It's the encounter between a very scientific mind and a profoundly spiritual mind. And so here we are.
Brilliant. That's brilliant. I have one more question, and then I want to open it up. But this is something that I think is very relevant to the art world today. But what was your first encounter with her work? Speaking of encounters, and how did you feel? And why do you think that makes it? Why is she so relevant? And whether your encounter makes it relevant today, but why is she so relevant today? I guess those are my questions for both of you. I'm curious.
I don't know. I remember when it is the first time I saw. I mean, I certainly studied her at the university before seeing a work by her. I remember my first impression. I was and still am obsessed by the eyes that she draws or paints, because I still ask myself, what are those eyes looking at? And it's actually me looking at those eyes. So it's kind of puzzling, and it feels like those eyes are not looking away. Those eyes are seeing far beyond, far through whatever they're looking. And so for me, she's the eyes, and she remains the eyes.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always this distance from when you start hearing a name to when you're seeing that artist everywhere, right? So I similarly don't remember like what that one moment was, but it was, you know, I have a sense of, oh yeah, Carrington, Varo, okay, these women, part of the surrealist movement that we weren't necessarily thinking of, and then to the point where, you know, Momo acquired The Juggler, I think it was 2018, and the kind of presence that painting often now has in our galleries, and then acquiring The Tower also, and that was like a very special encounter for me with that work, because it is so tiny and it's so small, and there's something about it in that 47 moment for me that's so poignant, because it's really this juncture for her, and it's such a transitional moment where, you know, for me, often it's the work before the kind of grand painting that, you know, is in like the major period, but to sort of where she pictures herself kind of 3 times on a precipice, like looking towards her past, fleeing in one direction, thinking about going in another direction in the future. And so that kind of juncture for me, I find like really poignant, the way that she inserts herself into the work, but it's still mysterious, and it opens itself up to finding oneself in that story too, rather than it being only like so specific. But I think your question too, Wendi, about, you know, the bigger art world right now. I mean, I've just come from like multiple conferences this week where the topic of spirituality and alternative spirituality is such an urgent one and a present one. And you know, I think there are moments in our history when rationality fails, and
and you know, I wanted to add that I think the pandemic has displaced us, and the balance between science and spirituality has, you know, come back on the table. And her presence at the Biennale in Venice 2 years ago, I mean, made a huge impact on many people that started to mention her name, and they never did that before. So I think, you know, that's really playing well right now.
Yeah, I think her work has an emotional effect. It was day one, I think, and Alex Adler upstairs said, we have a crier. Like, it was we hadn't even opened, and somebody was very emotional in the show upstairs. So I'm like, yes, welcome to the world of Varo. I would love somebody in the audience to ask a question or make a comment or observation. Anyone?
Just one thing, that some of the previous drawings that she made, like the ones exposed upstairs, Remedios, after finishing the painting, threw them to the trash, and her maid gathered them. And when she died, the maid went to Walter. He wasn't here. He was he wasn't her husband because they were married, and the maid gave them back to Walter, telling him that she gathered all of those that she threw because she didn't consider them important.
Bless the help.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wish El Greco had such a maid.
That's a wonderful story. Yeah, it's a wonderful story. Yes.
I first encountered Varo in Thomas Pynchon's Crying of Lot 49. I think it's terrifically important because she becomes the kind of inspiration for his heroine in the book to take on what amounts to a kind of definition of postmodernism as a way of looking at things, and to break away from the kind of despair and of the modernist kind of view of things. But for Pynchon too, she's so important because she's female. And her subject matter throughout. I mean, she's weaving and knitting and so-called domestic arts are bound up with what she's doing. And it seems to me it's so important to include that in an account of her, that her being a woman surrealist was a very important thing.
Yeah, I mean,
So this is the
Yeah.
first chapter of the Crying of Lot 49.
Yeah.
Pynchon so brilliantly describes her triptych, and this was in her show that was sold at that time in Mexico City to 3 individual collectors, and it took several people, my gallery included, I don't know, 10 years, 15 years to reunite it. And it was first shown reunited again here at the Met in the Surrealism Beyond Borders. And it was on view again and the Art Institute of Chicago show. So it was the inspiration, that chapter. Actually, the curator, Caitlin Haskell, was listening to that book on audio. And that's when it hit her, like, I need to do a Varo show. So it's a very, it's a brilliant book, and it's as if he saw it, and I don't actually know if he ever saw it, because it doesn't make sense. Yeah, so it's really beautiful.
But I think it's a very important remark that you just made, especially at least in France, and as a Frenchman, I apologize for that, but the Surrealist movement was quite misogynistic, and so there was not a lot of space left for women, and that explains why we had to wait far too long to globally appreciate what she did.
and also the attention to what you were referring to as sort of like domestic arts, right? If anything's having a moment in the art world as strongly as spirituality, it's craft, right? Weaving, embroidery, and the kind of presence throughout her work of whether it's embroidering the mantle of the earth or whether it's the attention to drapery and clothing. There's a study upstairs for taille pour dame, right, which is like it's actually the one male in the painting is like the fashion designer, but kind of the draping of the clothing, the kind of transformation of certain outfits into boats, or having mechanisms for escape or for travel built into the outfit. I mean, these like incredible fashion designs really that she's kind of working into the language of the painting.
And to get back to what drawings can bring in that conversation, if I am right, the alchemist, the painting in the drawing, we've learned that it was entitled The Women Alchemist originally. Yes. So that got lost, but happily it's back.
I saw somebody else had another question. Any others? No?
I have a question
about
the alchemy. Like if she considers herself an alchemist, and in what terms, like medieval alchemy or more Jungian alchemy? What type of alchemy and what source of alchemy was she looking at? Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah. If the question is, did Varo consider herself an alchemist, and if so, what type of alchemist? A Jungian alchemist, or what type of alchemist?
I'm not sure I am such an expert on the types of alchemy to answer that directly, but I can say that both in that kind of that kitchen based practice that she had with Carrington, where they were, making recipes and potions and concocting different combinations of materials, but then also the direct way that relates to her exploration as an artist with different materials and processes, right? There's such a metaphor there for, all of these figures in her paintings, whether it's an alchemist, whether it's a clockmaker or a watchmaker or a musician, the tuning of the harmony, all of these, the engineer, all of these kind of different practices are all kind of metaphorically related to each other in terms of that exploration and investigation.
And the potions she was doing was not related to like producing the inks it was not related to...
Related in like a bigger sense, but not in that direct sense. Yeah.
And being an artist is being an alchemist.
Totally.
Right.
Yeah. Good point.
And there was we have black and white photos that shows that when she was painting, for instance, she had like some little pieces of crystal on the easel. And she used it like technically and like to make incision, but there are also an alchemical purpose in the process. But I think not her understanding, but the use of alchemy is really to create harmony. And, create harmony between science and spirituality, create harmony in a world that was, torn apart, create harmony between the arts, music, nature, culture, all that. She was really, I don't want to use the word obsessed, but she cared very much about harmony. And I think this is one of the many things that she is conveying in her art and the lesson she's teaching as well.
One more question and then, yeah.
Well, I'm really sort of interested in one of the comments from the conservators or forensic investigators in the Chicago show is that she reworked some of those what are called cartoons after the transfer, and I was wondering, what that suggests to you.
Yeah, I think I think that is so interesting that even within that, we were talking about the different kinds of drawing, and that even within that kind of category of transfer drawings, there are some that might have made it into the garbage that a maid had to recover because that really was a working drawing, and some that we know from that forensic evidence that were reworked after. And I think you're a little bit answering your own question, right? That she must have felt that there was a different status to them to kind of bother to rework them and to add shading or modeling to them after their use value as a transfer was complete, shows that she did hold them in a certain regard and that she wanted to kind of continue that work.
Right. Well, I think on that note, thank you very much. We're going to conclude. Again, just thank you to Frances and at the folks at Other Beatty, and especially to you, Samantha, and you, Guillaume, for the amazing insights. I'm very grateful. I think I learned a lot. I'm sure everyone else in the audience did too. So thank you very much.